Welcome to the Crypto Podcast. You can find all our episodes on thecryptopodcast.org. We're also on BitChute and YouTube. You'll find the links in the podcast description. I'm also a podcasting coach because I've got 4 other podcasts, with 4 of them getting to the top 0.5%. And you'll find everything about me on bio.link/podcaster. Today, my guest, he's the CEO of Pennyworks. Please welcome Ivan Zhang. Did I pronounce your surname correctly?
Perfect, Roy. Thanks for having me in the show.
No problem at all. So you might let people know, because I know you've got some nice qualifications. You've worked in the financial industry, so you might let people know. Who's Ivan?
Sure. So I started my career in the depths of the financial crisis in traditional banking. And so I was working as a senior portfolio manager at Bank of America for the better part of a decade. And throughout that time, as you know, historically, crypto launched in essentially in 2009. And we got into crypto maybe in 2012, 13. And at the beginning, it was still very nascent. There were only 1 or 2 places you could trade them. But for us being kind of finance and tech junkies, it was pretty apparent that this was going to be something fundamentally new and interesting and potentially world changing. And so we've been keeping track of that technology for a while. We even started our own crypto mining facility in 2016, where we specialize in mining Ethereum. And eventually DeFi came along, which is what the focus of our startup is. And we say, hey, look, we've been finance and fixed income for over a decade. We've been crypto for this long. We have to do something with this, right? We have to bring the benefits of DeFi to the broader public. And that's kind of where Pennyworks was born. And that's what we've been working on.
Yeah, excellent. So you mentioned on the early days, there wasn't many doing it. I know Mt. Gox was one. Did you get caught up in that?
Yeah. I'm still waiting for my settlement from Mt. Gox,
Yeah,
this is kind
I
of
think
like
it was in a documentary done about it. It was kind of fascinating. And did he get jail, or what happened to the actual main guy in that? Did you know?
so I didn't follow too closely, but there was a pretty funny meme. So he did get to jail, but I think before he went to jail, he was somewhat overweight, and then after he came out of jail, he must have lost like I don't know, like 30, 40 pounds, and he was in a suit, and he basically people were just making a fun of him, or rather, this is a Japanese jail system, right? You come out and then you look like you have a good workout, like you're on top of things. So uh, and the irony is, because of the uniqueness of the situation, the way that the bankruptcy worked, that it actually was no longer bankrupt because it took so long for the proceedings that the price of Bitcoin appreciated well above the liabilities. Now, technically, they're not above the liabilities if you use it in Bitcoin units, but the way that the laws works there is that it's struck in Japanese yen at the time of the bankruptcy. So what's happening is the total asset of this bankrupt entity is actually much higher than the total liabilities that are owed to the creditors. And so they had to change it from a bankruptcy to a rehabilitation, which means, okay, now they're going to be back in their company. So you end up being that potentially this person that would otherwise been in jail for the rest of their life comes out and potentially is a millionaire because he's technically is an owner of a company that now is worth billions of dollars, even though it was previously defunct.
That's unbelievable. And I think they came out saying that somebody in Russia had actually got it. But has that been confirmed, that the actual person who knows? It could have been all in-house. It's unfortunately, like, it's probably impossible to figure this out, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, well, so there's 2 kind of separate initiatives. One is like working through the bankruptcy, which is essentially all the people, the lawyers in Japan were doing. I think that there might have been some people that are trying to recover the crypto, but at that point it was so early in the day. I don't think that there was good infrastructure to figure out, especially like the flow of funds relative to what we have today. Um, but even then, it was still a substantial amount that was left over, and so what people were saying is like, look, let's if you were trying to wait for that would drag on the case even longer, and it's already been over 10 years, right? So imagine if this had changed. Oh, we recover another 50 Bitcoin or 50,000 Bitcoins, then do a huge reallocation again and recompute some of these things. That might even take longer. So I'm just excited that like at some point this is gonna get settled and I'm gonna get a small check back for whatever I was lost.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So you mentioned about the mining that you were doing the Ethereum. So like where were you actually doing that?
So I mean, I'm based in United States, right? So we were doing it in the United States, and at the beginning, I was just playing around. So we would go to the electronics store, so the big one in the United States called Best Buy, and we just call them and say, "Hey, can I have some graphics cards?" Yeah, yeah, we just got some today. It's like, okay, how many do you have? Like, a handful of these, handful of that brand. Okay, I'll take 15. And then they're like, "You're you're not, why are you buying 15, right? Like, are you a wholesaler? We're not allowed to sell to other, wholesalers." And I was like, no, 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 I'm doing this legitimate thing. I was like, well, who games with 15 graphics cards? I was like, no, I'm not gaming, I'm doing crypto mining. And then they're like, what? I said, well, it's this thing where you use GPUs to solve hash functions. And then, obviously that discussion didn't go so well, but like they understood that it was a legitimate business. So they were like, okay, fine, we'll give it to you. Uh, and so that's how we got started. And the funny thing is that we did do Ethereum at the beginning and not Bitcoin, simply because we felt that it was a little bit more resilient in terms of the long-term capital investments. Uh, because ASIC chips were innovating very rapidly, so you would buy something and essentially would get outdated very quickly. Whereas GPUs, the life cycle of that was pretty long. So there was an opportunity for us to just make an initial investment and actually have a pretty useful life for the mine before we had to just throw away the hardware.
And with prior to the split or going from proof of work to proof of stake, did you get caught with the kind of the electricity prices going up that kind of made it no longer viable solution to be mining?
Well, it wasn't actually. So, I mean, we started pretty early, right? So what happens is you had like the 2017 boom, right? And there's the 18 crash. So during that period, it wasn't that the electricity prices were moving because if you have a large facility, right, like you sort of have contracts where you know what the price is going to be, right? And the producers like that because they know that they have a stable demand, and then you like that because you have a stable supply. Uh, the bigger factor was like we have a price that went up like 10x and then it goes back down 90x, right? And so the issue is that when it was going up 10x, everybody wanted to become a miner, right? So now the profit margins get squeezed, and then when it comes back down, invariably, people were mining unprofitably, and so there is like this ebb and flow in the market that is kind of like a moving average of the price, right? Because it takes a while to get your machines online, so you see the price coming up, and you have to build the facility, do all the logistics stuff. So in practice, what ends up happening is that you only benefit when prices go up pretty aggressively and then you benefit for a good few months, and then people catch up, right? Because then by that time they have already deployed the capital. So it is a pretty difficult business, I think, overall in the long term, because you have to constantly reinvest to make sure you have the latest technologies so that your marginal cost is lower, right? But when you do that, you also suffer a lot of depreciation. And so it's very difficult to make sure that incrementally you're always mining both profitably at the margin, so at every unit, but also being able to recoup your cost of capital. Um, it's similar, I would say, even to traditional mining. Like if you were doing gold mining or something like that, right? Like different people start mines. It's a little bit
So it's
more.
like the traditional one was the guys selling the shovel and the jeans. It's like the people selling the
Yes.
processing units are the ones making the money. No, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, think about it. Like Nvidia stock was going through the roof, last few years, and how many billions did it added to the market cap? And I don't know that all the miners combined ever extracted as much money out of Ethereum than just Nvidia's from selling the graphics cards. So definitely, that's a good business to be in, but not so much if you're the miner.
So what with when it's changed over now? Is it that you're going looking at a Bitcoin now, or what's your kind of plan?
So I mean, the irony is that when we started in 16 or 17, there was already talk that it would move to proof of stake in 2017 or 18. So we were like, hey, look, at best we're gonna get like one more year out of this, right? That was our expectation. Now then, 17 and 18 passed and 19 passed, and there's like no more words about it. And I'm like, well, you know what? Maybe this will actually last. So the irony is that we've done well simply because there was this always fear that you would have proof of stake just around the corner, which potentially made some people uneasy about investing or doing the mining facility, right? And because we were so foolish to do it at the beginning, we kind of just stuck with it, and then that made it so that it was profitable for us. But I wouldn't say it would be prospectively, if you were in 2020, something that made a lot of sense, unless you had a pretty decent amount of connections, and you could buy all these new NVIDIA 3080 graphics cards, right? And even if you did that, that actually pissed off a lot of gamers, right? Because they're like, hey, look, we actually legitimately want to play games. We just want one graphics card, so we can't get it because just sucked out all the supply. Um, so that is a fundamental challenge there. Now with the merge essentially, happened successfully, we essentially liquidated the Ethereum machines at the beginning of the year. There was some residual value to that, so I was like, well, look, we can keep mining, or we can liquidate at the beginning of the year. And then, it was pretty lucky because there's also huge price spikes in terms of energy at that point, right? So it would have been not so clear whether it would have turned out well or not for us. So we just reduced the
That was
risk.
good timing, so to basically sell while the market was still peaking, because you'll always get somebody coming in and investing. They'll think, yeah,
That's right.
they don't know, they don't really know that it's going to be changing over or anything like that.
Well, and the nice thing about GPUs is that you can actually use it for something else,
Yeah.
right? So when we're selling it, we're not like, hey, look, now you can use it to mine Ethereum. You can say, well, these are GPUs. You can use for rendering. You can use for compute. You can use it for AI, right? And it's still a regular computer that we have, as opposed to if you have like the ASIC miners, it doesn't do anything else, right? So that gives you a little bit more safety in terms of that investment, and which is also why we started with that in 2016. But I would say that it was not super obvious that it would have worked out okay, right? Because of how volatile things were.
Excellent, excellent. So before we go on to the company, Pennyworks, I just like to kind of maybe talk about your thoughts on different platforms to be using, wallets,
Sure.
because everyone's got their own kind of favorite. And I'd like to know what's
Yes.
yours.
So I mean, for personal use, right? And I want to make that distinction because personal enterprise dramatically different. For personal use, Ledger came out pretty early. Trezor also came out, I think around that same time, maybe even earlier. So I think Ledger I use the most on a personal basis. There's another one that's a recent newer one, which um, company called Grid Plus. I'm not sure if many people heard of it, but Grid
I
Plus
haven't.
One. So they come out. That's a pretty large device. This is like almost like it's a weird shape too. It's like a triangular brick. Okay. Um, but the reason it's large is because it actually has a full screen. So you're able to see the entire transaction before you sign it. And so that's kind of the
Mhm.
main benefit here, because any hardware wallet, you can sign something, but there's a risk between what you see on the computer, right? Which is what you think you're signing, but you don't know whether that's the message that's being sent to the wallet. Because when you go to the wallet, for example, on Ledger, it says blind signing, and here's this extremely long hash function or something like
Yeah,
that.
you don't even see it in one go. You have to scroll across, don't you? As far as I
Yeah,
remember. Yeah.
but even that, well, it's just not helpful, right? Because as a human, it's like, oh yeah, let me just compute in my brain if that's the right contract I'm signing. That is actually the main risk, right? And so Grid Plus One is a much larger device. It's a full screen, but the screen and is part of the secure element in the sense that like you cannot sign something that is different than what you see on the screen, right? Whereas if you have some browser extension showing something, it could just be, I could make a little app that just shows you what, A, and then it sends you transaction B, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then transaction B is like, send me all your money and stuff like that. So that is a feature that is extremely important and actually the core reason why you would want a hardware wallet. because the only other way to do it, like there's no guarantee that you can get that safety, right? What you see is what you sign is part of the security guarantees that you need to preserve. So Grid Plus One has this facility where you can see the entire transaction. They have a facility to also parse the APIs, which is essentially for Ethereum transactions. It knows what the call inputs and outputs are, right? And the nice thing is it can even tag some addresses. So you can have a user-friendly label, right? So let's say I can tag a specific address as Roy, right? So then when I see the transaction, I will see Roy. And if it's a contact address that's not in my list, it would just be a random address hash. And then you'll know something's wrong, right? And so really that makes it much safer because you both have the clarity in terms of understanding what you're signing, and two, the safety because you can visually check and very quickly confirm that this is what you want to do.
Kind of similar to like how Revolut works on PayPal, because you can kind of do the same thing. You can see if you've done a previous transaction that, I'd say Ivan bang and send it on. And how much are they, that system? How much is it,
Yeah, so the reason the Grid Plus One is so big, well, it has some other features about it, but it is kind of expensive. So it's like a few $100s. It's got some other ways that's useful where the core, which is where the seed is, can be swapped out by a little card. So you have the physical device, which has a seed in it, but you can also use another card, which makes it so that you can just have it like a desktop device that you kind of almost like a cash register, so to speak. They just plug it in and they can use it. And at some point, like maybe last year when it first came out, it was very hard to order them because it is a startup, new company. So it was difficult to get one. And I got one like close to Christmas. So that was like my little Christmas present there. I mean, I'm not affiliated with the company. I just like tested it
Is
out.
it
I
an
thought
American company or where they? Because I
I
think Ledger's French, is it? As far as I remember, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So Ledger is French. I think the company is American, but I'm not quite sure. I mean, when I ordered it, I got it pretty fast, so within a week. So I imagine that it was shipping somewhere within the United States. Um, that's my guess. Um, but so far, the interface was innovative and it's definitely useful in terms of safety. So if you are really concerned about that, like spending an extra couple $100s on it is worthwhile. But I think Ledger now also has newer versions of their software device that can also do that. Maybe for the enterprise version, which is again where you really want the correctness to be there. But I haven't used that yet, so I wouldn't be able to vouch for it.
Okay. Oh, excellent. And for say the security, because there's so many people getting caught in scams. They go into the website thinking it's their like. What advice would you give people to obviously using the wallet that we've just mentioned? But
Yeah.
how would you kind of advise people to be protecting themselves?
Well, so first order, the situation that we were saying that the man in the middle, it's very rare, right? That's a situation where your own computer is compromised somehow, or maybe the website is compromised. And in practice, it's not even that, right? In practice, you can see in MetaMask that you're just doing something wrong. It's just that most people don't notice. So what I would recommend is when you're using MetaMask, there's some pretty straightforward tips. First is when you're sending a transaction, MetaMask does tell you what the actual address that you're or contract you're interacting with, right? And you can very easily click on the link that just pops it up. And you can double check what it is. And on Etherscan, it'll labeled, let's say it's labeled like a compound or Uniswap, it'll tell you. So if that's the case, then you know that this is the actual, at least this right contract you're calling, right? So that's issue number one. Second of all, you can just put a nickname on it or some label. So that next time you're calling it, it'll show up as a known address. Just like the way that I mentioned before, where if you can see a label that you already know, then at the very least, that's safer than something you don't, right? Number one. Second of all is being able to parse the transaction data. So MetaMask does that okay for some protocols, but it doesn't do it for all of them. So for example, I think Ethereum works well, but for Polygon, for what it didn't really parse, and Avalanche and so on and so forth. And obviously, there's so many EVM compatible chains now that it's not a guarantee that MetaMask will be able to show you properly all the outputs, right? But that's like the first order of defense. It's like, are you actually calling the right contract? And you can see that in MetaMask before you do that transfer, right? Second of all is there's also a tool that just shows you all of the approvals you've had for specific tokens. And that's actually also available on Etherscan. So you can go and say, well, this is my public address, right? What are the things that I've provided approvals to across all the tokens? And you can list them out. And if you think, oh, I'm not using that anymore, you can just specifically go out and disapprove them so that you don't have any potential leaks in the future, right? Part of the challenge is that some of the contracts, they're all upgradable, which means that, okay, if I approve this contract, but then the code actually changes, it could still be compromising, right? And so that is another way you can, maintain your, I would say, crypto wallet hygiene. And that doesn't require any additional investments. It just requires you to be 30 seconds slower for whatever it is you're doing. Now, unfortunately, if you're trying to like fight for an NFT mint or something like that, this advice would probably make you lose out. But maybe 9 times out of 10 is better be safe than sorry, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And like coming from a kind of financial background, looking at the regulation with the crypto, I just like to know your thoughts on that, because I mean, my own experience with the financial, especially when we saw the crash, there's so much trickery going on with central banks that a lot of people have lost faith, and they think that's why Bitcoin was created. But like regulation and kind of how central bank are kind of liaising and taking this on board as well, I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's no one regulation, right? Obviously, there's the European set of laws, there's the regulations in the United States, and of course, every country should have their own policies on this. But fundamentally, the intuition as to why the regulations are there is that they really do want to protect the consumers from scams and frauds and things like that, right? It is legitimate driven. They're not really trying to say we're out to get you. They're really saying, hey, look, we're helping our citizens, right, to make sure that they don't fall for these scams. So it's not that it's coming from an area where it's, oh, we're going to prevent you from doing this because we are like a evil secret society that's trying to maintain power, which is sometimes the narrative that specific communities in crypto have, right? So that's not the way that they're coming about it. Now, the problem is that since it's so new, they don't really know how to help you, right? Like, for example, like a lot of regulators talk about crypto. How many regulators have actually used MetaMask? How many regulators have actually made one transfer? How many regulators have purchased an NFT? That's okay, sure, you don't need to be a professional about it, but you should actually maybe use it once, right? It's like saying that you're like the head of the transportation or something, and you're trying to make policy about things, but you've never driven a car before, right? It maybe helps. I'm not asking you to say, hey, you need to know how to build an engine from scratch, right? But if you're going to make traffic regulations, maybe you should know how to drive, right?
And
So,
because I saw that they brought in, because I'd done an online course, it was free, with Gary Gensler on MAT. So I know that the American government brought him in. So obviously he understands it a lot better than the rest of them. But I don't know, is he still involved in it, and where it is with him on that?
I mean, I think I'm just from what I'm seeing in the media, right? There is a basically uh, definitely the folks in the crypto community are somewhat disappointed because um, yes, there are securities laws. These laws are very established. They've been built nearly 100 years ago, like now 1934, something like that. So it's not like we are saying, hey, look, we're going to completely disregard 100-year-old laws, right? But then the issue is because of the capabilities of the blockchain, right? We can create a set of products that falls on the entire continuum between being a bona fide security on one end to just a simple programming tool or utility, right? And you can fill any combination of those things because previously, in order for you to do that, every one of those iterations of something that you test out has to be done by lawyers, has to file all these things, all these paperwork. So the pace of innovation in financial products is very limited. It's not small, but it's very limited, right? So 2008 financial crisis, people were talking about CDO squared, financial engineering being the new evil that's destroyed the economy, and so on and so forth, because they're creating all these fancy products um, that essentially were mostly just benefiting the people that are selling those products, right? But what that dynamic is in traditional finance is magnified 1,000 times in the blockchain, because you have a contract, there's a source code, you can change 5 lines of it, that's another contract, right? And as often the people change code, you can have different variety of financial products. So the taxonomy or the space of possible things you can have is no longer a security, a non-security, right? It could be a thing that turns into a security, or the changes to a non-security over time. It could be very fluid. It could be that it goes the reverse too, that it is not non-security for a long time and it turns into a security, maybe on purpose, right? There's no such taxonomy in securities law. They're just, you start and it's a security, or you start and it's not a security, right? Or maybe it's like with Ethereum, historically there hasn't been a determination, but now it's enough of decentralization, so it's no longer secure, so on and so forth. But it's just not a sufficient language to frame what is happening right now on the blockchain, right? So I'm not saying that it doesn't cover an aspect of crypto, but I'm saying that it is disappointing because they're saying that these are the only two types of things that you have, a security or non-security, right? Whereas, like, instead, if you think about it holistically, look, you have a technology that is essentially the internet of money. What does that mean, right? What are laws that we need for those kind of innovations to flourish, right? And maybe some of them will fall into the bucket for securities. Okay, great, and those will enforce that way. But what about the 95% of things that fall into the gray areas there, right? That is not. Now you basically is forcing them to say, look, just you have to make it way more utilitarian and drop some of these security features, or the other way around, where if it's a security, you can't use it for other stuff, right? And the other thing is, it is supposed to help with transparency. It's supposed to help with safety, soundness, and trust. But the fundamental issue is that you have to pay a lot of money to get that designation, right? Which becomes an issue about fairness, right? Only well-funded companies can have securities, right? Just because they're well-funded doesn't mean that they're more like legitimate in terms of the business model. Or maybe it is because people, obviously have a venture capital funding. But in the fundamental scheme of things, you don't want the discriminator being how much money something has, right? And unfortunately, that is the situation for a lot of these things. And that's why a lot of people are saying that's unfair, right? So promoting fairness of access, right? Because if you use the same argument with internet, there are a lot of laws that says, hey, look, if you're an internet service provider, you have to provide internet to the whole region, including people in rural areas, right? It's not economically viable for you to provide internet there because you're just laying down a pipe for like 5 person to go on the internet. It's probably going to cost you like $20,000 per person. Are you going to ask that person to pay $20,000? Well, you want the internet, this is how much it costs, right? So that's not a fair treatment. So you need to say, hey, we have a financial innovation, right? The fairness is say, how can we create laws that enable just about everyone to benefit from it without having artificial barriers, right? I'm not a legislator, but you can think about it. Hey, look, if you think that the SEC is a stamp of approval, right? You can say, hey, look, this is a project that has a stamp of approval, right? This is a project that doesn't have the stamp of approval. If the product doesn't have a stamp of approval and you still decide to use it, buyer beware.
Yeah.
Now, the unfortunate thing right now is that even people that are legitimately really into crypto, what do? It's, oh, I'm going to find this super crazy altcoin. It's going to go 100x. And yeah, of course, it's not a security. What? Because it has all this utility, it has all the potential to do this, X, Y, Z. You buy it, it drops 90%. It's like, I can't believe it. This thing that is a security, I feel like I was defrauded. Like, why did you tell me there was a security, right? That's called moral hazard, right? And actually, that doesn't help anyone. That doesn't help the people that you're supposed to protect because most of them probably went into wide-eyed knowing that it's not a security or not legitimate, right? It's called like Shiba Elon Mars. What do you expect, right?
Yeah.
But then they say, oh yeah, when it fails, you can say, okay, well now I'm gonna call the regulator and appeal to the regulators. When the whole premise of the blockchain was that it's supposed to be permissionless, right? So not only are you not giving clarity for people that are creating projects, but you're also teaching people the wrong thing, right? That there's like, oh yeah, well if it works out, then I could just use the money and say that it's not security. If it doesn't work out, I could just like blame it on the regulators, right, or something like that. And that's not the right message.
Yeah, makes total sense. Yeah, yeah, love it, love it. So with Pennyworks, so I'm assuming penny make your money work, but I could be wrong. You might explain
Yes,
the naming. And the other thing is, I saw the co-founder. He looks like, because I'm Irish, but I live in Poland. He sounds like
yes,
he's got a Polish surname, either his
yes,
ancestors are from Poland.
yes, yes. So my co-founder and I go way back. He is Polish. His parents are Polish, and we have built a company which is pretty straightforward. We want to be a compliant place where people can get the benefits of DeFi, right? And right now it's challenging. It's not challenging in the sense that it takes a long time to do because you and I, if you go on, you can probably spend 5 minutes to participate in DeFi, or if you didn't know about it, you can learn about it for a few hours. There's nobody preventing you from doing that, right? But what happens is that because blockchain is almost like an internet of money, it's both an investment, but it's also a tool or operation. Whereas traditional finance, like investments, are kind of segregated from businesses, right? So if you're doing something, like if you're going and renting a van and doing some business, that's something. But if it's an investment, you just pay money and something happens, right? And even though DeFi is very easy, there's a lot of operational part to getting that to work separate from the investment. And traditional businesses are just not set up to deal with that, right? So like, oh, I'm a business. What I'm gonna do? I have some cash. I can put it in a bank account, right? And then I earn some interest. Not a lot, very little, but I earn some interest, right? Or I can invest in another business, right? Rent a place, start a store, all that stuff. That's like operational, right? Well, DeFi sits in between because I have to first get the crypto wallet. I have to decide which protocol I have to place it into it. I have to manage it and look into it, rebalance, so on and so forth, right? So it becomes a lot more operational. And also, if you're a business, maybe you don't have expertise in that because it is difficult to make sure that you're safe in crypto, right? If you've been doing it for a while, yes, it's pretty second nature, but tons of people get scammed. Will you invest enough effort to understand that business, right, of DeFi, just so you can earn a few more percent? And most people say no. It's like, well, I have my main business, which is XYZ, right? Selling donuts, whatever. Um, and I want to offload the investment part to something else because that's how it's typically structured right now. So what we're doing here is I said, look, we're providing a traditional finance interface to DeFi, right? So traditional businesses, when they look at us, it's like, this is an investment. This is an actual security. It's compliant with securities laws, right? And we know how to interact with that because we do that all the time, right? Businesses, they put money market funds, the businesses buy treasuries, bonds, things like that, and they buy securities. So they know how to do that, right? It's not that they don't want to participate in DeFi, but it's like they don't have the interface to participate in a way that makes sense for them, right? And so there's also this challenge here. Is like a lot of people say, not your keys, not your coins, which is true. But in traditional finance, nobody holds the keys to anything. You
It's
don't hold the
true.
keys to your
Yeah.
bank account. You don't hold the keys to brokerage. I'm not saying that it wouldn't be beneficial for people to potentially do that, but it's just that people are not trained to do that anymore, right? So they don't have that institutional knowledge or even the capability, or legally they're maybe not even allowed to do it, right? That's why there are custodians in place. And so this is an opportunity here where we really want to bring the benefit of DeFi. We want to bring more adoption. But maybe the way to do it is not to force everybody to go into DeFi and be a crypto native, degen, whatever we like to say, right? But just say, hey, look, this is a this is a tool just like any other tool that would improve your financial life, right? How can we get it to you in the easiest way that you prefer to use it, right? And that might be in a traditional financial vehicle, right? For example, a lot of people are waiting for the Bitcoin spot ETF, which is in the United States still not a legal product, right? And when the Bitcoin futures ETF came out, there was a huge amount of interest. Well, why is that? Because it's not like Bitcoin's new. It's almost been out for 10 years. There's tons of exchanges already. Who is it that's buying this product that I wasn't able to buy it directly, right? So clearly, the fact that billions of dollars have gone into means that there is a value there because a lot of people, or even corporations or other entities, just are limited in the way that they can interact with financial vehicles or products. So our product, very straightforwardly, we help people generate income from DeFi. But what we're doing is providing traditional financial interface in the form of security. And that way people are able to do that without having to deal with the operations of managing blockchains, parsing transactions, even computing your own taxes on crypto is very difficult, especially when you are doing not even just regular capital gains, but interest accrual accounting, right? And that's something that we've looked at many providers, and just a few of them have a complete suite of tools to do that, or you just essentially have to hire a lot of accountants to go through those transactions with you.
Yeah, I've had a guest on actually where it works in the States and trying to get it organized in the rest of the world, but the trust to get over the capital gains legally, that you don't pay the capital gains on it, so I mean, obviously that's when you're trading big volumes, because it takes, it costs a lot to get this set up at the start, but there's ways of actually, doing that.
Yeah, yeah. So it is a whole suite of challenges. And even if you were an individual just trying to just do that, like, okay, well, it's fun. So if it's a hobby, you will spend the time. But if it's not just a hobby and you just really want the investment portion of it, the fact that you need to invest in the an accountancy, let's say you even have $100,000, right? And let's say you do pretty well, you make like 10%, but then now you have to pay $5,000 for an accountant to go and figure it out because what you're doing is relatively cutting edge, so to speak, right? So then you kind of nullify all the benefit, even though you had the decent foresight and you did all the right things, but then you're gonna spend a lot more time on the accounting, which is the last thing you want to do. Right?
And my experience, because I've had a lot of companies in a lot of countries,
Yeah,
most accountants, they don't really, they're more tax collectors, to be honest, from my experience. I read kind of revenue books or guys that work for revenue on what your allowances are. They'll never tell you. And I mean, I've experienced that in a lot of countries and
yeah.
different entrepreneurs that I talk to as well. Whereas you say, can I do X, Y, and Z? Oh, yeah. Can I do this, this, this? So instead of paying tax, you get a rebate. But, they don't seem to have your back, and which is a shame. You'd assume that they'd be trying to reduce your tax bill, but it doesn't seem to be the situation.
Well, I mean, I think part of the challenge too is that because it's so new, right? It's difficult for them to be very confident about the tax determination of things, right? Especially when the governments are not super proactive and say, oh, by the way, this is how you should do it. And now the irony is that it's actually the IRS, and in terms of the United States and how things are treated, is actually a little bit more clear than the or a little bit more proactive in determining what is and what is not a taxable kind of event, right? And part of it is because very early on, the IRS says, hey, look, let's just treat crypto as like a physical good, like a chair or a table or something like that. So legally, even if you sell a table at a gain, you should be reporting taxes. Just like if you go on a yard sale, right? If you bought something $100 and you sold it for 150, that's like a capital gain. In practice, nothing happens because if you sell something used goods, like you usually don't make more money than you've already paid for it. So there's not like a gain to be recognized. But the other thing is sometimes people, pay with things for crypto, right? And a lot of people are like, well, if I paid in crypto, it's not cash, so nothing really happened. But the abstract sense of the world in terms of accounting basis, like, did I give you something of value? Did you give me something of value back? If that's the case, then there's an event that's potentially a taxable event, right? So either you've recognized income or you sold something and so on and so forth like that. So, a lot of people have, unfortunately, especially people in crypto native space, have used the excuse that, oh, this is new, therefore there is no tax obligations for it, or it doesn't apply to me. And that's not the case, right? And part of the reason why I'm against that is because I do feel like if you want this to be mainstream, right? If you want everyone to benefit, it has to be something where it's widely recognized and used, right, in a compliant way. Because otherwise, if it's always fringe, then you're not going to get all the benefits from that, especially because financial networks, right, and networks in general, they benefit from having more and more people in the network, right? So we really win when it's so natural and so second nature that everybody has a crypto wallet or some kind of well-regulated custodian that manages a crypto wallet, right? Or in such a way that regular payments, most of the stuff could happen through crypto wallet, right? And we do that by saying, well, then that they need to have well-established tax procedures, well-established ways for government to interact with it, so the government can feel comfortable about it. And that's how we really win at the end.
So when somebody, because I seen from the site that it's like 4 to 6% is the kind of return, and you can do it daily as well. It's not you're locked in, which I always find a huge benefit, because some of these things you sign up for a year or whatever. With what annoys me is for a lot of the companies kind of doing what you're doing when they're paying with fiat through the credit card. It's the credit card processing companies and PayPal like taking say 2.93%. That's taking a lot of the margin. So I would love to see them kicked off, because there's no way it should be that high that they're charging that.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is just how the existing financial architecture is, right? Um, if you want to receive money in traditional finance, that is actually the only way, because otherwise, how would they do it, right? So I think in Europe, you have a much more effective system, right? Because you can pay people through IBAN, and I think it's fast
Yeah.
and nearly real time, right? In the United States, there's no such thing. Uh, so there is certain features like called RTP, and a new one that's coming out called FedNow next year, which will allow much more real-time payments of traditional dollars to individuals, right? But unfortunately, because so there's like because the United States was so new in terms of the financial adoption and the innovation, the irony is that it actually takes them longer to get to the next level because there's such an installed base of people with the old technology. And the analogy there is similar to kind of cell phone adoption, right? Cell phone adoption, for example, in China, just happened much faster than the United States. Why? Because there's not that many people with landlines, so they didn't have to switch. They're just like, well, now I need a phone. What is the latest phone? Oh, that's the mobile phone, right? And so that's kind of part of the barriers to entry. So the United States was kind of first, and a lot of developed countries have these systems already in place, which means that then you have to switch, which is a much more expensive cost than say if you just didn't have a system. There's nothing workable, then I'm just going to use the latest one that works for me, right? So until we get that broader adoption, until we get the cost down, and that's part of where the Ethereum merge comes in, right? Most of the main chains are EVM compatible, and some of the chains are going to use Ethereum as kind of their settlement layer or checkpointing system. And when they do that, they're also going to do rollups or other methodologies to kind of scale up the transaction throughput, which means at some point you're going to be able to process very mundane but frequent low value transactions, right? 10,000, 50,000 of these transactions per second. And when that finally does happen, there could be a point where, hey, look, I'm just gonna go and then load up my crypto wallet, and then I can just use it for day-to-day transactions, because incrementally I can pay 0.005 cents to buy coffee there, or 25 cents with my traditional credit card or debit card or whatever. If I have a business, I'm accepting it that that's what the cost I'm paying, right? And 25 cents, maybe it's not that much, but it's a huge difference if you're a small business. I mean, most of the things you sell, like if you're a coffee shop, you're selling $5 things, right?
And it's not just that, actually. It's you don't get the money immediately. They're normally
Right.
like 30 days later. Whereas when you're doing it on the blockchain, you're getting it
Yeah.
instantly.
Yeah. And so some people don't appreciate that cost, right? So what happens is that anytime when you have gaps in which two events happen out of sync, what you need is some financing, right? to bridge that gap, right? And so what's happening is like if you're paying for the coffee shop, well, the guy gave you a coffee and then you didn't give them any money. So they're really bearing the cost of not receiving that money now. Because then, well, let's say tomorrow they run out of coffee beans and they go buy it. Well, they don't have that money. They have to then either borrow the money or have a stash of cash that they need to do that. So when you make transactions atomic in the sense that the cash transfer at the same time as the coffee transfer, there's less need for additional financing, right? Now, for $5, maybe it doesn't matter, but if you think about it on an industrial scale, tons and tons of money flows through from this kind of gap financing. If you have a project, you have like a shipment or other stuff, like it might take 2 weeks or 3 weeks, somebody has to front that cash to get that to work. That's a huge load of a lot of what the financing business is, right? So if we're able to do that settlement much faster, we can actually free up the cash to do other things, which might actually translate into more efficient economy, lower cost of funding for just about any other source of projects that you need to do, right? And reduces risks, right? Now, if you were buying a house in the United States, it's very, very manual, a lot of paperwork. You have a table, and especially in New York, there could be like 10 people on this table signing documents, filling out forms, all that stuff. Okay, so then everything's good, and everyone's happy with the paperwork, and y'all go home, and then like what's one guy gets hit by a car or something. What happens to the documents that they had? You know what I mean? And so there's nothing that actually is finalized at that closing table when you're buying a house. There needs to be a lot of other issues that go through before the house is definitely yours. And so in between that, there is a lot of risk, right? So having atomic transactions and using those as default medium to settle things reduces risk significantly in the system. And that could basically bring benefits to just about everybody.
And like with because I see the system in Poland for property, and it's actually a lot better than Ireland. I mean, Ireland is like you're waiting for one solicitor to get the documentation to go to the other guy, and it's like they're just playing tag for 3 months, and they're just emptying your wallet at the time. Whereas here, you get the documentation to the notary, you go in and you just sign the contract in front of the notary, you're done and dusted. And like when you look at doing everything on, say, the blockchain, because I mean, in a lot of countries, you have a lot of even solicitors, doing dodgy deals, whether getting more mortgages or selling something a few times. That doesn't happen when it's done through the blockchain with a smart contract.
Yeah. So there's an entire industry in the United States. I'm not sure if there is one in Europe. Probably there is, but it's called title insurance, right? And title insurance is just an insurance to say that when you actually bought the house, that the owner actually had the right to sell it and that you are the rightful owner of the house. It's silly to buy an insurance for something where conceivably, why isn't that something that you could assert before you buy the house, right? And the part of it is because the records are poorly kept, right? So if the records were properly kept, and it's just to your point, like how much does it cost to actually do a transaction where you just basically assign the label to who owns the house to this new person, and then assign the money to the second person? It costs like 5 cents,
Yeah.
right? And so, but here instead, you have all these lawyers, you have the title insurance, which is tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the purchase price, all that stuff. All of that overhead goes away.
I see it happening, and I see with the NFTs and everything, it's all exciting, but no, it's the future's looking brighter. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, and then on the topic of NFTs you were mentioning, right? So like NFTs is interesting. So I think even now most people don't think NFTs are securities, which that I think that's a fair assessment. Now, if you draw a picture and you sell it, like that's not security. But the moment you start fractionalizing it, right? So that's what I was talking about with the continuum. The moment you fractionalize it, start selling it, then it becomes potentially a security based on US law, at least, right? But what if you fractionalize it where each person owns a specific pixel? Then maybe that's no longer a security because there's a one-to-one correspondence with the thing that you bought, right? As opposed to a pro rata share of the thing that you have. So these considerations have dramatic security considerations, but on the implementation side, it could have just been like, oh, how we built the contract, right? And so there is a degree where there's a huge opportunity here for developers of smart contracts to be a lot more familiar with kind of the legal considerations of the design features, because it might be that on the exterior, with the outcome, it looks the same. But just how do you account for it in the intermediate steps that causes it to have a different security designation, right? Now, I'm not a lawyer on this, but I feel like there is a huge gap there, which is why there's so much conflicts. And we could do much better by being to resolve ourselves to say, hey, look, we're gonna be able to get more broad adoption if we can build things that are consistent with the law, or at least easily interpretable by the law, so that people feel more comfortable with what we're doing.
Yeah, no, definitely. Listen, Ivan, thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You might let people know where they can get in contact with you.
Yes, so pennyworks.com is our website. We're also on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just look for Pennyworks. My name is Ivan Zhang. I'm also equally easy to find on LinkedIn and Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. We always love to chat about crypto, finance, and economics, and any other topic that you'd be interested in. Yeah.
No, perfect. Yeah, thanks very much. I'll make sure I put all the links both in the audio and the video.
Thanks a bunch, Roy.
So that's all for the Crypto Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on thecryptopodcast.org. As mentioned, we're on YouTube, and I'm also a coach, as I discussed at the start, bio.link/podcaster. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, share with your friends. Until next week, take care.